everyone, Mr.B here. Hey, so it looks like we've finally reached 100 subs on YouTube. Time to celebrate. And by celebrating, I don't mean let's actually throw a party. I mean, let's tell an interesting story that is unique from the rest. And this one rather hits that nail square on the head. It is unique as it is a noir type story that is a gumshoe, a detective type tailing, but in Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah, should be fun. Enjoy. I knew she was trouble when she walked through that door. Her intentions ill-suited her beauty. That red dress, those swaying hips, and the freshly done-up makeup didn't help her case. Disappearances in the force, she said. Some noble kidnapped, she said. This was the kind of client that only appeared especially gloomy days when liquor was short. The soft rainfall was my anchor to reality as she over-dramatized the ordeal. To an untrained eye, it would appear that my client was desperate enough to drape her silky soft legs over my desk. I, however, knew she was only talking softly because she enjoyed wrapping men around her finger. Fortunately, I was immune to her feminine wiles. Unfortunately, she was rich. I took the job, but while I was stupid enough to take the job, I wasn't stupid enough to dive in head first into the forest alone. Mercs weren't hard to find and hire. I guess they looked tough or something. Maybe it was the elf. I can't remember. They didn't last long anyways. We were ambushed on the road. Our assailants were some kind of hideous, contorted abominations. It was clear that they had once been human, but now they sported extra eyes, missing or extra limbs, a primitive voice worse than my ex, and a skin riddled with malnutrition, discolorization, and boils unique to every individual mockery of man. I was sure I would contact every known and unknown disease just by being near them. Paying for our lack of attentiveness, we were slapped in shoddy cages and hauled into the mountains. The escape was bloody. Those mercs weren't worth 2 half coppers, but they at least kept those monsters off me long enough for the Madmen to arrive. I'll admit, I didn't immediately take to memorizing their faces or names, but I would do so soon. Here they were in the middle of nowhere, chasing vague visions and delusions of grandeur. Unlike most adventuring groups, they could take care of themselves, a fact demonstrated when they obliterated a small gathering of abominations faster than I'd ended my previous relations. Apparently, they were going my way. Something about some poor paladin's brother. I wasn't going to leave this case unfinished, and they'd be better protection than those mercs anyways. My reasoning couldn't prepare me for what came next. The place they were looking for was called the Pit of Defilement, a name that sent shivers through my spine. though I didn't know quite why. I buried the feeling in booze long enough to prevent myself from doubting my decisions to press ahead. That flask turned out to be my lifeline. We came upon a village of things, all bowing to a massive black pit at the center of town. They were tribal, dumb, illiterate, but there had to have been over 100 of the bastards. Not a fight I was keen on getting into. Despite my voice being dipped in 3 meters of gravel, I had a way with words, and the malformed things were willing to listen. Their language was crude, but an explanation that we wanted to join up and a little politeness was all it took. Yeah, right. I may have an ugly mug, but it's my ugly mug. I wasn't going to exchange it for a facial tumor. We descended down into the pit without bloodshed, but not without a sense of being watched. The inside was filled with waterfalls and lush vegetations that contradicted the pit's name, leaving a bad taste in my mouth. It seemed my newly found party knew something was wrong when a group of those abominations walked out with the bodies of a previous adventuring group in tow, their loot stripped from their lifeless bodies. I almost lost it right then and there. At this point, I was convinced that these adventurers were being led here by vague visions like a moth to a flame. There were several dozen reasons someone would want to capture and loot adventurers, and they likely specialized in it. Yet, when I relayed this information, they shrugged their shoulders. A one-armed full brog named Uther spouted something about tension at its peak, a line meant to sound cool and keep morale up. And everybody nodded in agreement and just kept walking. I knew then that my newfound company was full of fools and a little regard for their own lives. That and the ex-Inquisitioner. The Inquisition. The mere mention of that horrible organization was enough to make me spit out the whiskey I was trying to drown myself in. It was full of people who used religion as an excuse to take what they wanted and burn anyone who got in their way. When it came down to it, witch hunts were never about witches, and anything they could become heretical at a drop of a hat. I wasn't even aware you could become an ex-Inquisitioner. Anyone who defied their religious gods died fast. Perhaps these people were more suicidal than I thought. I did not yet know that I was the fool. A fool among madmen. We entered the dark cave. It was big enough we couldn't see the walls, only the ankle-deep water that coated the ground. For a few moments, there was nothing. Then a brilliant white light shone through the darkness ahead. I almost died enough to know what this looked like, and I was well in the back of the group when all this went down. Turns out, the water wasn't water, it was blood. The vile liquid flowed up from the cave floor, which was made of children. They squirmed beneath my boots as they played simple games like tag, duck, duck, goose, and tearing each other apart. I drained what little remained of my flask in a vain attempt to forget the hideous laughter. The cause of this? Magic. I hate magic. It was a rare occurrence, but whenever magic popped up in any of my cases, it was liable to throw every deduction I made out the window. Due to its rarity, I knew too little, and often too late. But even I knew this was powerful magic, the stuff every lord worth his salt would try to obtain. To make matters worse, I was pretty sure this counted as evil, if there really is such a thing. Now, sitting in front of us was a beautiful lady, holding a bright light as we'd seen earlier. Beside her was some sort of knight. I learned later that this was the paladin's brother, the one the party had come here for. I straightened my duster, tipped my hat low enough to hide my facial expressions, and rested my hand on my woodcutter's axe ready for a fight. The party, however, had other ideas. Shockingly, the monarch of these tribal monstrosities was willing to talk, at least a little bit. I wasn't opposed to figuring out what little about my enemy. Knowledge is power, and seeking every advantage is a good idea. However, the conversation droned on a little longer than I had thought it would. Anticipating what would happen next was impossible. Apparently, the monarch of the damned was attempting to protect her people. They lacked all empathy. A bunch of savages, really. But she was attempting to put them straight. She was really bad at it, and I could take a few guesses as to why. Good intentions, however, was all it took for our ex-inquisitioner to attempt to relate to them, saying they weren't beyond redemption. I can only imagine the expression on my face as he began sympathizing and then flat out saying that if she cannot take care of her people, that he would. I thought he was insane. I looked for the rest of the party for validation, but they all nodded in agreement. There was a back and forth between the monarch and the ex-inquisitor, who I finally noted named Riker. Apparently, the abominations were suffering from a serious case of abominant issues. Can't imagine why. The monarch argued that this was all a trick and that Riker would leave her people to die. However, the party's argument was solid. The party would take them to the conveniently isolated castle and teach them how to live normally, and Riker would show enough conviction to get through to the monarch. I almost raised objections several times, but this monarch was holding something called a demon soul, and I was already at a disadvantage. Avoiding a fight was preferable, and towards the end of it, I even added to the ridiculous conversation. I argued that, due to the uncontrollable nature of her people, someone would eventually investigate, and while the monarch was evidently powerful, her people could not withstand the armies of man. A relocation was required, and since she was conveniently fused to the throne and therefore stuck in place, This party of terribly good people was her best bet. It was enough. The monarch actually agreed that she could not protect her people and gave us responsibility over them. Problem. The party had just agreed to one of the most difficult parenting jobs in the last century. Keeping one tribal eldritch hobo in line would be hard enough, but a few hundred of them? There was no metaphor in mind that could put into context the depth of madness that had befallen us. Once I had confirmed that the party actually intended to follow through with their promise, I tried reasoning with them that these creatures clearly weren't worth all of this trouble. Nothing. And I tried stating the facts that this was a logically and moral nightmare. Nothing. Finally, I suggested that if anyone caught wind of this, especially the Inquisition, they would be exterminated on the spot. No word swayed their incomprehensible conviction. This band of adventurers was not made up of holy knights. They did not have to keep every promise. And yet, here they were, beginning a trek across the continent with hundreds of monsters in tow. The worst part? I'm crazy enough to go with them. I hope there's more whiskey up ahead because I just ran out.